Perhaps a dry subject for early on a Saturday morning, so I'll try and make this as straightforward as possible. So, the impact of compound interest and the ravages of inflation on any investment. Albert Einstein, who described compound interest as the greatest mathematical discovery of all time. He went on to say, "He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it." We'll now go on to show how compound interest works and the effects of it. So on the left-hand graph here, we've got a starting point of £1,000 as initial capital, and we've got a period of 20 years across the bottom, and we've got an assumed rate of 10%. So I think we can all see there that if you were just to take the income off that, £1,000 with 10%, you're going to get £100 income per year. Over 20 years, that's going to add up to £2,000. Total interest there of £2,000. However, if you were to leave that interest in the investment, then over the time you're going to get an interest not just on your initial £1,000, but on the interest that's been accumulated. So in year one you get the £100, and then year two 110, and then 121. It starts to rack up. The effect of that over 20 years is that the figure becomes over £7,000 at the end, and that's the effect of compounding. So it is powerful, and I think that graph demonstrates that very clearly. Now, what we're going to show here is that that principle applies not just in how investments work and how income works on investments, but also how it applies to inflation. Because inflation effectively is a cost that snowballs in the same way. Now, over the last 10 years or so, inflation from recent historical, let's say the last 40 to 50 years, has actually been very low, and there's been a concerted effort across the global economy between all the governments to try and keep a lid on inflation, keep that low. But even so, the cost of living, if it was £2,000 in January 2007, that would have risen to nearly £2,500 10 years later, so a 25% increase. That's quite dramatic, particularly if you're on a fixed income. That is going to hit you. Some of you might be able to remember that in the 1970s, inflation in any one year could have been over 20%. Kathy, you can't remember. No. So that is actually relatively modest, but 25% over 10 years at the same time is quite dramatic, or could be quite dramatic. So this compounding effect, as I say, it applies just in the same way. So at that rate of the 10% that we were talking about there, in the earlier slide, you would see your cost double in 7 years, which again is quite a level of cost that you've got to try and absorb. So, how do you counter inflation? And as we go through the slides, clearly we're probably all aware that cash at the moment, again because of government policy and the financial crash in 2008, which is still running through the system, we're not getting anything for cash. Banks aren't paying anything. If they are, it's next to nothing. You're getting 0.5% if you're doing well, or if you're tying your money up for a couple of years, you might squeak up to 1.5, 1.7, something like that, but you're tying your money up for some time to do it. So this is why you would consider equity or bond investments or some form of investment with a view to trying to keep your money ahead of inflation. What we're talking about there is what we call a real rate of return. the example here at the bottom is if inflation is 3% and a bond or an investment is paying 5%, then you've got a real return of 2%. So you are getting 5%, but the effect of inflation is really meaning that your investment has got a real return of 2%. The spending power of that money in the future, it's 2%. So again, there's an example to work through here. So we've got 100,000 initial investment, again the same term, 20 years. We're going to talk 5%, but we're going to also suggest the 3% inflation. So over 20 years, if we just look at the investment in isolation, it would have grown to 265,000. So over 2.5 times its value. We'd all be very happy about that. But it's wrong just to look at that in isolation. After taking account of inflation and working that through the figures, the real value of that 100,000 is 146,900. Still a good return. You've increased the real value of your investment over that 20 years by 50%. So you're keeping ahead of inflation and you're actually improving the value of your investments. Nothing wrong with that. Again, we'll look at the bank account here at 0%, and 0%, it sounds dramatic, but it's happening. If you'd have left your money in the bank account, that would have nearly halved over that 20 years, the real return. The effects of inflation would have seen that drop to 55,000. It's a very real problem that we see. A lot of people are concerned about investing in the markets, about investing in shares, any form of investment, bonds, keep it in cash. We've talked about pensions. John mentioned pensions. A number of people have exited pension schemes and then just decide to leave it in cash because they feel it's safer, it's more prudent to do so. But the effects of doing that over a period of time, clear to see there, it's going to really damage what the real value of the investment. So, to summarise that part, low rate cash accounts and fixed rate savings may result in negative real investment returns. If we look at asset classes such as equities, bonds, property, they're just a couple of examples. There's various forms of asset class we can look at, and in fact there are plenty of investments now that class themselves as multi-asset. So you've got a fund manager who's looking to invest on your behalf across all the different asset classes. That can help provide protection against inflation. So those managers are looking to invest across all the different asset classes, and probably their first priority is to try and beat inflation and keep the real value of your investment intact. Of course, as soon as you invest, you have to acknowledge that you're going to incur investment risk, and that's where you've got to then decide the potential risk and reward argument as to whether you really want to punch the lights out and go for it, but you've got to accept that that could mean at times of high volatility or market uncertainty the potential losses are greater, or whether you want a steadier return. So the principle there being investing for the long term in a diversified portfolio of assets, as John mentioned earlier, is arguably the way to look at it and make so that it is properly diversified, it is looking at a longer term, and you're not just dipping in and out and trying to make a very quick return. Very dangerous. So it's really important to summarise there that you understand the impact of investments on your assets, and there's what might be a familiar warning to a lot of you here at the bottom, which thanks for that one, John. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future results or performance. The value of investments can go down as well as up and is not guaranteed. Therefore, investors may not get back the amount originally invested. I've talked about different asset classes and the idea of multi-asset. There's an idea of the different types of investments and asset classes that you might want to look at, starting at the bottom where you've got the cash and deposit accounts. So we've got a higher risk going up this side, but the lower, or the potential for lower returns going down this side. So right at the top there you've got shares, individual shares, higher risk of loss there, but potentially higher returns, and it's a case of balancing out. And as John was mentioning about collectives, whether it's unit trusts, OICs, investment trusts, a fund that might invest in 100 shares is obviously helping you diversify rather than just picking one and hoping that that does well for you. So, useful links. John's already explained the money advice service there in some depth. There's the Alaman Financial Service Authority and Your Money, which are all links that you might want to look at when you're making some of your decisions. Right, I'm now going to pass on to Sharon, who will look at lifestyle financial planning.
Thanks very much, Steve. Okay, this is going to be interesting. So I just stepped down as being president of our Personal Finance Society in the UK, which was a really great privilege for me. And you get a theme for the year, and the theme was financial planning, which is great if you're a financial planner. And I happen to believe, though, that financial planning is probably the most important and most authentic profession of the 21st century, which is a really bold statement to make, but I really believe it. Because, you see, financial planners have the key, they have the intellectual property, if you like, to unlock everybody's hang-up with the very last taboo. And no, it's not what you think. It is the second most addressed topic in the Bible. And it's the 21st century skill that every human being needs, which is actually financial capability or money skill. Because you see, people don't talk about their money, not to family and not to friends. It's a big secret. And that's a problem if you don't take advice. And because money is it's man-made, we don't have any natural instinct in how to deal with it. So when we're trying to make decisions around money, when we don't have the actual natural skill, it's quite difficult when you're not taught how to use it. So probably the best place to start when you're talking about financial planning is why. Why? Why do you need to plan? Well, it tells you there, it's a process of setting, planning, achieving and reviewing your life goals through the proper management of your finances. But why? Who knows what their goals are? Well, if I said to you we all have exactly the same amount to spend every week, what would you think? You think, well, we all got different amounts of money, right? But 168 hours a week is what we all have. And whilst we're working, somebody else owns some of that time. We don't own our own time if somebody else is paying for that time. When you get to retirement, of course, you have 168 hours a week to spend. So the question is, how are you going to spend that time? And how are you going to pay for that? So it's kind of the lifestyle you're kind of aiming for is based on that very one concept. So here is a process of what lifestyle financial planning is. Establish your financial goals. It's all about you. You know, where have you come from? What was money like growing up? Where have you got to? Where do you want to go? So when you develop your strategy, that's about what is it you want to achieve, and you look at your financial analysis, which is actually what have I got so far, where have I got to? And then you're going to prepare your strategies for action. What choices do you have? What choices are you going to make? And then how you're going to implement that and how you're going to keep on track, which is forward planning. So, because I like drawing, here is one I prepared earlier, and I don't know how many of these pens will work, but let me show you what I mean. Okay? Right, so we're starting with a bucket. Okay. So in this bucket you have liquid assets, okay? So this would be, if you've managed to accumulate throughout your life so far, some savings in the bank, let's say, some investments, let's say, some national savings, all this sort of stuff, all this good stuff in this bucket, which is liquid. You can have it, you could spend it, it's yours. You could get hold of it in 7 to 10 days if you had to, anything, shares, endowments, things that you could, if you wanted to, you could perhaps get. Other assets, which are not liquid, do not figure in your everyday planning. So things like houses, that is illiquid. You can't just sell off a room in order to get some money. And pensions. It's not a very good bag of money. There you go. And that's outside of your bucket too. You can't actually have these. And occasionally, if you have a business, you know, I hear plenty of people say, you know, my business is my pension, but at the moment it's illiquid. It's only worth something if someone else if you can sell it to someone for something. So these are all above your bucket. They are illiquid. This is the bucket. That's liquid. With me so far? Great. Okay. So then we have current inflows, which are things like salaries, maybe dividends, maybe child benefit, and all of these things, taps of money going into your bucket, which are great unless you stop work, kids grow up. All those things turn off to be replaced with future income. We've got pensions, basic state pension, and we also have other things such as if you have a final salary pension scheme that might kick in at some point, and all those things go in your bucket and they last as long as you do, theoretically. So on that basis, your bucket should just fill up, shouldn't it? Except it doesn't. And this is where I've been about why? What do you want out of your bucket? Well, the thing is, most of us have a bit of a hole in our bucket, and this is called our current lifestyle. And that's coming out in a bit of a torrent. You know, it pays for nice things, nice holidays, nice cars, nice, well, anything that you fund your lifestyle with, basically. And that's your lifestyle there. Now, when it comes to thinking about your future desired lifestyle, theoretically, you'd want a bigger hole in your bucket, because that turns off, and this is where you spend even more money. Because let's say that's where you've got the health and the time and the money to do the things that you've always wanted to do, the things that you've gone to work for in order to, when somebody's paying for those hours, this is where you've got more free time, theoretically. Because sadly, that turns off one day as well, to be replaced by a smaller hole in your bucket, called the too old to enjoy yourself. And obviously, I don't know if I'm even going to go where that goes, but ultimately, we shuffle off our morsel coil and we are a dead parrot. So, looking at what lifestyle financial planning about, it's not about planning for dying, it's actually planning for living. So this is about the hole in your bucket and where that money comes from. And where do you get to that point from, it depends on how you marshal your resources in order to be able to live the best life possible with the money you have. Big lifestyle, big number. Little lifestyle, little number. Pretty simple. So, moving back to this, that's what all that does. Financial planning is the overview of that. You can do it yourself with a relatively complex or simple spreadsheet. And these are the other transitions that there's about 60 life transitions But these are some examples of what can... Planning is what you do, but life transitions are what happens anyway. You can prepare for some of them, but other things you just cannot prepare for. The curveball. Who has children at school and elderly parents, and all the connotations that that throws at you, that the life's curveballs. So there's all these things to take into consideration, which is why regularly reviewing where you are with financial planning is essential. It's like sat-nav. And this, just a sobering thought, I suppose. Typical life cycle of personal income. There you go, it's falling off a cliff. That shows on the right-hand side of the flip chart where the income turns off. I'm thinking that your lifestyle doesn't turn off in the same way. And I'm thinking that these days the concept of retirement, unless you're lucky enough to have a final salary pension scheme, is rather quaint. I think more of us will actually choose to be fulfilled in life in other ways, and whether we exchange a paycheck for a playcheck is a concept to be further developed as time goes on. But life's a journey, and the job of our role, if you like, is to help people enjoy their lives. So, I think that's about it for all I was going to say, really. But thank you very much to the previous two speakers. It's very possible to overcomplicate investments, I think we'd all agree. And the three characteristics of a successful investor typically are faith in the future, patience and discipline. And I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much.